All right. My name is Paul Dankwa, and I'm presenting this particular presentation on the topic of Introduction to Planning for Climate Change. We will look at the significance, methodologies, and global initiatives with regards to planning for climate change, nationally and then global-wide. So this presentation will cover the introduction, climate change impact, climate change and national planning process, significance of incorporating climate change in national planning, functions of local, regional, and national institutions in climate change planning, key components of recognized national climate change planning, and then challenges in climate change planning, as well as the opportunities and benefits. So climate change, as we all know, refers to long-term shift in temperatures and weather patterns, and mostly it takes place over a 30 to 35-year period. And so if we are able to consider the weather conditions for every month of the year for 30 years, and then we look at the average, we are able to tell the exact climatic conditions of a particular place. Now, when there is sudden shift in this average over the place, this is when we say that the climate is actually changing. What am I saying? For instance, sometimes you might have a place that receives rain in June, July, and August only. But all of a sudden, you keep receiving enormous amounts of rainfall in January, February, March. You realize that, yeah, the climate and the weather conditions, the weather patterns are not the same as it used to be. So we can say that there have been changes in the climate, especially if this persists over consistent years or even months. So these changes may be natural or could be human induced. Yes, so these changes could be natural or human induced. Natural from sun's activities or volcanic eruptions, or could be human induced. That is through activities like burning of fossil fuels, and then through vehicle combustion engines, through aeroplanes and airplane combustion engines and the rest. So combustion of fossil fuels release greenhouse gases like CO2, carbon dioxide, and CH4 methane into the atmosphere. What these gases do is that they envelop the Earth and acts like a blanket wrapped around it and traps the sun's heat from escaping through the Earth's atmosphere. So this results in a warming of the Earth's surface, and this particular phenomenon is referred to as global warming. So let's look at some of the climate change impact. So for the year 2016 to 2018, climate-related disasters cost the world $650 billion US dollars, United States dollars. And it is important to highlight this because most of the places where this climate change impacts are being felt are not major contributors of greenhouse gases. What am I saying? Most of these places take place in Africa, and African countries do not generate a high amount of greenhouse gases. Yes, though they are the ones being impacted heavily by these climatic changes. And so it is important to know the disparities in the impact, the generation of greenhouse gases and its effect on the environment, as in floods and droughts and the rest. Some estimates suggest that damages associated with global warming could total 54 trillion United States dollars by the year 2040. And in these past years and in the coming years, we'll be experiencing hurricanes, heat waves, and other extreme weather events. And especially in the case of Africa, and for instance, Central Africa, leading up to the northern part of the continent, we expect more heat waves, droughts, and even increasing desertifications. So climate change impact, this is a map showing the different parts of the world and the impact of climate change and their vulnerability to climate change impact. Those in the red are highly vulnerable to climate change. That is those countries like Brazil here, Ghana here, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Mexico, and the rest are very highly vulnerable to climate change. Those that are intermediate, sorry, this particular one is India, not Brazil. Brazil is actually here. Those that are intermediate, like those in Latin America, like Brazil, Chile, and the rest. When you come to Africa, we are looking at Central African Republic and those that are intermediate between the vulnerable and less vulnerable. The least vulnerable ones are those mostly in the developed world, the United States, Canada, um, the European nations, and the rest. So you realize that climate change vulnerability has to do with available technology, infrastructures, and then finance available to a country to adapt to climate change. And these are systems that are readily available to the European and developed countries, but not very available to those in the developing world. That explains why, despite the fact that those in the developing world contribute little to global warming, but are the most vulnerable and the most impacted by climate change. So climate change impact in agriculture, we have increasing temperature and rainfall patterns affect crop yields, and in this case, leading to lower agricultural productivity. And in some parts of the world, the increasing temperature leads to outbreak of certain pests like the caterpillar, and then some of them that feed on plants. And in the picture below here, you realize that the increased heating has led to fire outbreak, which is destroying agricultural lands. Healthcare costs. So rising temperatures contribute to the spread of diseases carried by insects like mosquitoes to new regions. And this mostly affects those living in Africa. Looking at the schematic here, we have climate change impact on human health, air pollution and increasing allergens, extreme heat, causing illnesses and death from cardiovascular failure, that is heart failure, drought, that is water supply impact, dust storms, environmental degradation, forced migration. Sometimes forced migration leads to conflict in some part of the world due to the fight for limited resources. These resources have become limited because the climate change is causing the water systems to be reduced in size and volume. And so more people are depending on a smaller water body than they used to, which used to satisfy all of them, but now it's only able to satisfy a small group. And because of the battle over it leads to conflict. Wildfires and smokes, degraded living conditions and social inequalities, changes in vector ecology, that is organism that transfers diseases like mosquitoes, flies, and all of that. Food system impact, malnutrition, food insecurity, higher food prices, foodborne illnesses. We have severe weather and floods, and then water quality impact, harmful algal blooms, campylobacteriosis, and the rest. So infrastructure damage. This images tells it all. The damage caused by flood. Look at how it has pulled down several homes within a neighborhood. Now you can't think but to wonder how much it will cost to repair all of these homes and to also prevent subsequent damages like this. So these are some of the damages that we are looking at. Look at this one, how the water has washed away a significant portion of the road here, and how it has exposed humans to this particular hazard. Assuming if this is a sewage pipe, assuming it has bursted, it would have released the feces into the water bodies, and there's a higher possibility of outbreak of cholera and other related diseases. So we are looking at displacement and migration. So climate-related disasters can force people to leave their homes, leading to internal displacement or migration. And this displacement can strain resources in areas receiving climate migrants. And there's what I explained earlier on. And in most places in Central Africa, this is what the problem is, leading to conflict in those areas. So climate change impacts still moving on resource scarcity. So climate change can exacerbate competition for resources like water and arable lands, potentially reducing to conflict and geopolitical tensions. So the schematic here shows it all. Global temperatures rising, resources become more scarce as plants, food, arable lands, water, fresh water resource becomes more scarce. There is this battle for control over it, and that leads to conflict in most areas of the world. So climate change and national planning processes. So climate change poses a serious threat in achieving the sustainable development goals, especially in developing countries. So countries that rely heavily on climate vulnerable sectors such as agriculture, water resources, forest and biodiversity are particularly at higher risk of improving the conditions of their citizens. So it is important to incorporate climate change into national development planning processes because this will make development more resilient by reducing climate change impact. So this is a schematic of the National Action Plan on Climate Change by India. So it says 8 missions to address climate change concerns and promote sustainable development. So in their National Climate Action Plan, and there's a national planning strategy actually. A lot of countries do have this. They have National Solar Mission, National Mission on Sustainable Habitat, National Mission for Sustaining the Himalayan Ecosystem. Now take note that this is a country that is now the most populous country in the world. And so it is essential that they incorporate these climatic strategies into their development plans. Otherwise, they might search for money, but their development may not be sustainable because it puts future generations at higher risk. Significance of incorporating climate change in national planning. So it becomes a crucial tool to ensure climate change adaptation and poverty reduction are implemented hand in hand, enhancing resilience to climate vulnerability and climate change impact. So this ensures that economic activities flow naturally and there is income generation, but at the same time, it reduces the vulnerability of the citizens to climate change. So increasing adaptive capacity of communities and national activities facing climate change impact, ensuring sustainable development and avoiding decisions that will generate maladaptation. So functions of local, regional, and national institutions in national climate change planning. So in local, one of the functions of some of the functions of local institutions is community engagement. So local institutions such as city councils or community organizations engage directly with communities. So they assess local vulnerabilities, gather input from residents, and implement measures to address specific climate-related risks like flooding, heat waves, or sea level rise. One of the important things to consider in climate action is the local, or what we call the indigenous communities or indigenous people. It is important to incorporate them into the planning because they are at the forefront of this impact and they are at the forefront of actions to prevent climate change. So you can't do these plannings without them. And this is why local institutions play important role because they are the ones who engage with these indigenous people in terms of action implementation. So infrastructure and urban planning, that is, they focus on local infrastructure resilience and sustainable urban planning, including green spaces, public transportation, waste management, and energy efficient buildings. And then also there's a picture of some local government agencies working with the local communities to address climate change and synthesizing solutions to them. These are some of the examples of them. So in regional institutions, we have cross-jurisdictional coordination, that is regional bodies like state or provincial governments facilitate coordination among various local governments within their jurisdiction. They can help align policies and strategies for broader climate action and resource sharing. So what this means is that the regional institutions actually oversees the local institutions. They bring out the strategies and then the local institutions also implement it. So economic development, as regional institutions may promote sustainable economic development strategies that account for climate risks, encouraging the growth of green industries, or investing in renewable energy projects at a larger scale than individual local governments might be able to do. So this is a typical example, regional workshop on health and climate change. National institutions, so policy and legislation, it is the national institutions that set up these things. research and development, they are initiated by government institutions, international negotiations, for instance, those at the Conference of Parties, that's the COP on climate change, the Intergovernmental Negotiations Committee, INC, and all of that that has to do with plastics. So it is the national institutions that carry out this particular exercise on behalf of countries and then regions, that is continent and subcontinent. So let's look at key components of a recognized national climate change planning methodology. What are the key components? It has to do with assessment. So this part involves gathering data and conducting comprehensive assessment to understand the current state of the environment, climate risk, vulnerabilities, potential impact on various sectors. So to be able to understand the current state of the environment, climate risk, vulnerability, you need to conduct an assessment. And this assessment involves scientific research, data collection, modeling, and scenario analysis. That is why these particular individuals here are collecting data as part of the research process, which feeds into the assessment. And then adaptation, you need to incorporate adaptation strategies into the national planning scheme. So once the risks and vulnerabilities are identified, the next step is to develop adaptation strategies. And this involves creating plans and measures to minimize the adverse impact of climate change. Adaptation strategies could include building resilient infrastructure, introducing crop varieties resistant to changing climate conditions, implementing early warning systems, developing policies to safeguard vulnerable communities. So these are some of the adaptation strategies that need to be incorporated into the planning. So you first conduct an assessment, two, you consider adaptation strategies, and then mitigation plans also feeding into the planning. So mitigation focuses on reducing greenhouse gases emissions to lessen the severity of climate change. And the mitigation actions include adopting clean energy sources like solar energy, wind energy, hydrothermal systems, and the rest. Improving energy efficiency, like initiating policies that allows importation of energy efficient home appliances, promoting sustainable transportation, like depending on electric vehicles, initiating carpooling campaigns, and the rest. So then you come to the implementation strategy of the plan. So how do you implement the plan that you've set up after you've done the assessment, you've considered adaptation strategies, you've considered the mitigation measures, how do you implement it? So implementation involves putting plans into action. That is, it includes setting clear goals, creating policies and regulations, allocating resources, fostering partnerships, engaging stakeholders. So this is quite a holistic approach, and it involves a lot of stakeholders and people in the process. So the implementation strategy is a very, very important component of the plan. That not all, you need to involve everybody in all stages of the national in the national climate change planning. In the assessment level, we are taking data from those at the forefront, the local communities, the government stations, development agencies. We are also taking info from them at the adaptation level, at the mitigation level, and the implementation strategies, we are adding them because they are major partners in implementing any climate action plan. So the planning process, it involves monitoring as well as evaluation. So in monitoring, we set out performance indicators that you use to assess the progress of your action. And then you continuously evaluate it at every stage of the process to ensure that it is actually going according to plan. So you evaluate the progress of the, of the action plan against the indicators that was set out at the beginning of it. So global programs assisting nations in climate change preparation. So there are a lot of them. I hope I'm able to give you an overview of the most important ones. One of them is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. It is an umbrella term under the UN that focuses on climate change. It's a framework where all states within the world can come together, have discussions, make contributions to how the world can cope with climate change. And one of the ways they do this is through the Conference of Parties, COP. There have been 28 of this conference of parties. We've had it over different years and over different, it's held in different cities and countries. The latest one was COP28. COP is Conference of Parties 28, which was held in the United Arab Emirates. The previous one was held in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Before that, it was held in Scotland. And in the next one will be held in Azerbaijan, which will be this year, 2024, actually. We have the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is also a multinational, multi-stakeholder umbrella organization within the United Nations that brings together scientists, climate expert engineers to look at the current state of climate and then also do future projections on the climate in the coming years. And then the IPCC, I think I should note that they generate synthesis reports, the SRs. I think we currently have the SEED synthesis report, which shows the current state of the Earth's climatic conditions and future projections. We have the Green Climate Fund. This is a funding agency that funds climate initiatives. Adaptation Fund also does the same thing. The Global Environment Facility also does the same thing. Climate and Development Knowledge Network also does the same thing, right? So global programs assisting nations in climate change preparation. We have the Paris Agreement adopted in 2015. It is under this Paris Agreement that they started conducting global stocktake on climate change, and then also started the nationally determined contributions, NDCs. Then they also have national adaptation plans. Most countries that are under this particular framework have their national adaptation plans, which is plans to ensure that the country is more resilient and adaptable to the changing climate. And then we have the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We all know what the Sustainable Development Goals is, the SDG, which is a follow-up to the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs. Yeah. So challenges in climate change planning, we have scientific uncertainty. So predicting the exact impact of climate change on specific regions is challenging due to uncertainties in climate models and the complex natures of Earth system. What does this mean? For example, if there is a volcanic eruption, that goes against every estimation and every prediction, because you know, maybe they didn't plan that there could be a volcanic eruption, and all of a sudden there is a volcanic eruption, right? So this spews tons of carbon dioxide and other gases into the atmosphere, so it affects the whole global climatic system, and this sort of becomes an outlier to what had already been planned. And the global nature of issue, climate change is a global phenomenon. It's not mainly restricted to a small portion of the planet. So because it's global, it involves a lot of nations, and it's sometimes difficult putting people from different countries together to agree on a common goal. Long time frame. So the long-term nature of climate change requires planning for impacts that may not be fully realized for several decades. So these are some of the main challenges: resource constraints, social and economic inequality, because climate change affects people differently. Even within a community, some women may be affected higher than men. Children may be affected because sometimes teenage girls who menstruate at the end of the month needs a lot of water to keep themselves hygienic. If climate change is impacting them and they don't have that much water, you realize that one, it could affect their education. They might decide not to go to school during their periods, and it could also be a social stigma against them. So you realize that climate change impacts different people differently, and even different economies differently. Technological barriers. Those in the global south mostly do not have access to the high-end technologies for climate monitoring, and this is the problem. And even for direct air capture technologies, solar PV cells are expensive to acquire. So these are all some of the challenges that climate change planning faces. We have policy and regulatory challenges, behavioral changes. Sometimes it's very hard to change the mindset of people towards sustainable practices. For instance, if they've depended so much on the forest for meat, and you tell them that, no, it's not good to do that, sometimes it is very difficult for them to adapt to what you are telling them to use it. So these are some of the challenges that are faced. cross-sectorial coordination because climate change affects different sectors, economics, social side, agriculture. Sometimes coordinating people within these particular sectors is difficult. And it might not even be at the national level. It has to be at the maybe the continental wide or global scale. So just imagine the enormity of such activities. That is a very, very significant challenge. Another one is public awareness and engagement. How do we get people involved? How do we get local communities involved? How do we communicate climate change to people in a way they will understand in their own perspective? Sometimes you have to translate what you are saying to their language. You have to, it takes a lot of resources, human capacity, financing. And so doing that is quite expensive and a huge challenge. So let's look at the opportunities and benefits of climate change planning. So innovation and technology advancement, yeah, that is one. Economic opportunities. Whilst climate change is affecting the world, we should also know that it's also an economic opportunity. One of them is the international transferable mitigation outcomes, the ITMOs, where those that are in the countries producing limited greenhouse gases are able to trade it off to those that are producing high amounts in a way get income for it. So energy independency, for instance, if you are in a home and you decide to opt in for solar PV cells instead of depending on the national grid, you are independent of the national grid. You don't have to pay electricity bills and all of that. So that makes you independent of that. Enhance infrastructure resilience. So planning for climate change includes efforts to build resilience infrastructure capable of withstanding extreme weather events. And this is true because, like the image of the flooding that I showed, if they had built houses that were made of concrete, maybe it would have been flooded, but it would have been completely destroyed by the floods. So by looking at building or making plans that are climate resilient, we're able to build infrastructures that are also resilient to this particular climate effect. Health benefits. We also looked at reducing vector spreading, cardiovascular diseases, sea acidification, and all of that. Biodiversity conservation. Yes, if the climate, the atmosphere is heating up, and the river bodies are also evaporating faster, and we are losing the amount of water in the river body. The animals that depend on them are also dying out. The plants are also dying out. So by incorporating climate change planning to our national plans, we are also, in a sense, promoting biodiversity conservation. So community engagement and social equity ensures that opportunity is given to everyone who deserves it and also promotes global collaboration. So indeed, climate change impacts all sectors, necessitating integration into national planning for sustainability. Local, regional, and national institutions are crucial for policy formulation, resource allocation, and community engagement. Assessment, adaptation, mitigation, and implementation are all integral for effective planning. There are several initiatives around the world, like the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Green Climate Fund, the Paris Agreement, and the rest that are there to support nations in climate change preparation. So in all of it, despite the political hurdles and all of that, international collaboration is essential. And we also have to be proactive in our planning for that leads to innovation, job creation, and sustainable development, especially at the national level. And this goes in much into the developing countries as well. So urgent need for collective effort in planning for climate change, shaping a resilient and sustainable future. I believe that by going through this particular presentation, you've gained a lot of insight into what climate change planning is, the important roles institutions at the local, regional, and national levels play, and the international organizations that are available to support nations and even NGOs and individuals within their own field to contribute to climate action. And I hope that this has been very insightful. You can reach out to me or dankwaten@gmail.com. My email is at the first page of the cover page of this presentation. I wish you all the best. Thank you.